I'd like to introduce at this time Dr. Chuck Knapp, who is going to talk to you about the Education Reform Commission. Dr. Knapp has worked with the partnership for a number of years. He has provided just outstanding leadership in education, especially at the higher education level, nationally, here in Georgia, across the board. So we are delighted that he has joined us today to give us an overview of the commission, little thing called an Education Reform Commission. Talk to us a little bit about the recommendations and maybe even give us a little hint of what might come from the legislative session, we hope. Dr. Knapp.
Thank you. Let me first of all note that although I'm flattered, I am not the vice chairman of the State Board of Education, which is one of the things that's listed on the program. But as noted, I did have I guess it was an opportunity to chair the Education Reform Commission. And what I want to try to do today is spend about half of the time I have making a few remarks, and then spend half the time responding to any questions you might have, because I think that'll really get more to kind of the way you'd like to spend the time rather than having me talk at you. First of all, let me thank the Georgia Partnership and Steve for hosting this. I think the partnership over many, many years has been one of the most constructive forces in education, particularly primary and secondary education in Georgia. I was only half teasing when I said that I waited with bated breath for the 10 issues each year, because they've always been so crisply laid out and so much on point with respect to the kinds of things that we're concerned about, and I found that particularly to be true this year. I was trying to think how to handle my 17 and a half minutes of remarks with you. And I'd like to go a little offbeat in the first part of it. What I want to do is talk about why education reform. Why are we concerned about this? Why are we worried about this issue? And then I'm going to turn to a kind of a version of rapid fire, which is, in reading the comments that have been made, I'm going to try to make a comment on several aspects of the report that seem to be getting the most attention at this point. And I'll certainly miss things that you want to talk about, and that's what we should do during the questions and answers. But let me start with why the report. You're dealing with a labor economist here, so buckle up at this point. Back when and many of you know that 10 years ago or so now, seems like just yesterday, I chaired what was called the Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce that issued the report, Tough Choices, Tough Times. And during that, for the first time, I focused on this piece of data. Obviously, the data was from 2005 probably, rather than 2015. But what this is for an economist, the sort of gold standard of how things are going in middle-class America. This is U.S. median weekly earnings. It's done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. None of these surveys are perfect, but this one is as good as it gets. And what this kind of measures in constant, in this case, they had it in $82, $84, so they're inflation corrected. If you looked at actual median weekly earnings in '79 and 2015, you'd get a pretty good expansion, but it'd only be because the cost of living and other factors of production have gone up during that period of time. But in this 36-year period, if you do it in constant dollars between 1979 and 2015, and you can pull all this stuff off the BLS website, look at that growth rate. $335 to $340, almost flat. I don't know what you're going to do with your $5. I'm gonna have to think about that. But what that tells you is that even though the hedge fund guys on Wall Street and others in America may be doing a whole lot better now than they were in 1979, generally for middle-class America, our wages and salaries have stagnated across the country. This is a pretty startling result. When we used this data for the first time I'd seen it used like this in the Skills Commission report, we had several commissioners, including some former cabinet secretaries, question the data. They said, well, that can't be true in America, but it is. This is what it is at this point, is our basic standard of living, if you will, has leveled off over this period of time. So you've got to take a look at this and say, why? And there are a lot of factors of why, a lot of reasons, very complicated kind of question. But one of the answers is the quality of K-12 education in the country in a period, I'm going to go directly to the PISA test, which is the internationally normed scores. 2012 is the latest that they have on this. Internationally normed tests of that are administered, as you can see, across 65 countries. And I didn't want to get the print real small, so I kind of abbreviated the results. But you can see that in 2012, and this is in the media a lot about how our international tests are kind of middle of the pack. The U.S. tests are in the middle of the pack. You can see the byline in there about where we're kind of bracketed in mathematics between Slovakia and Croatia. We do a little bit better in reading. We're, no pun intended, a little south of Vietnam, north of Spain, and poor Peru is 65th in both. Now, why these two slides? Because there's a relationship, I believe, and most labor economists would agree, a relationship between these two slides. We live, as Thomas Friedman famously told us several years ago, in a flat world where things are digitized that 30, 40, 50 years ago we never could have imagined would be digitized. What this means in general terms is that our workers have got to compete with workers in other countries. And this is how the other countries are doing. If you went back, if you were able with PISA tests to go back 50 years, you would have found the U.S. very much toward the top of these rankings. Now, Education Reform Commission says, what are we going to do about this? The reasons for this are very complicated, and you all have, in the media, have written on this and understand this. But what I want you to understand is the relationship between what, by any estimation, and you could play with this data or look at other data, look at the TIMS tests and things like that, but there's a relationship, a strong relationship between this and this, in my mind. And that's one of the sort of basic tenets that I enter with in this debate. So that if we're going to affect this, we're going to have to somehow figure out a way to affect this. We're going to have to regain our comparative advantage. That means our workers have got to be better educated and more productive. These are workforce type issues. But this is an important tenet that, you know, if you look at the bias that I came at this with, or came at both commissions with, this would be the sort of primary bias, is that this is the heart of the problem. Now, I localized this a little bit for us in terms of Georgia, and you all have seen this, so there's some references to it already this morning. These are the NAEP tests for 2015. I was surprised they already had 2015 up on the website. But we're in the middle of the pack. Georgia's in the middle of the pack. If you look at it statistically, they've got a group of states that are what they say clearly above the mean. I guess this is median actually. States that are in the middle, kind of that are statistically insignificant from the national average of 221, and Georgia's a little bit above, but in that category. And then they've got states and jurisdictions in the case of District of Columbia that are below. So what you draw from this is that we are in a country that's in the middle of the pack from competition. We're in the middle of that country in the kind of I always use the term mediocre, but in the middle of the results. Now, these have gotten for Georgia a bit better in recent years. There have been some improvements with the NAEP test. Some of that shows in Dana's books. You know, you have to read it pretty finely to see the differences, but there is an upward tick going on there, and that's good news. I mean, any improvement is good news relative to other states. You know, we need to worry about the competition with other states in the U.S. We also, though, need to worry about the competition, as I said earlier, internationally. And here's another chart that I thought was interesting for reasons that I can't determine, never knew before. The Census Bureau does this data, and then they turn it over to the Federal Department of Education, apparently. But this is per pupil current K-12 spending by the Census Bureau 2013. And you can see we're a good bit below the national average there. We're at 36. If you include the District of Columbia, there are 51 jurisdictions. Idaho's at the bottom. New York, Alaska, and D.C. are at the top. And you know what this tells me, and I'll get a little bit more into this, is that my instincts would be I'm very worried, and the Commission was very focused on spending the money that we have as wisely as we can, but there's room for growth. There's reason for growth in the amount we spend. Those are two different things, and the Commission focused on the first, but I'll go out on a limb now that I'm a retired chairman of the Commission and say that I think we probably should be spending more money on education. But like anybody else, I would argue that we ought to make sure, absolutely sure, that we're spending that as wisely as we possibly can. So with that as background, let me go to my rapid fire part of this and just make several comments. First of all, there is much more to the Commission report is available on the Governor's website. Just go to the Office of the Governor, State of Georgia. It'll lead you to the Education Reform Commission, and you can grab an electronic copy of this. And I encourage you to do that because I get the impression that that there seem to be people out there that are not carefully reading the report. I'll put it that way. There is much more to the report than the funding formula and teacher pay, which have gotten a lot of the attention. There were 4 other subcommittees involved in the report. There was early childhood education, which was led by Amy Jacobs, who's the commissioner of DeKalb, that made some substantial recommendations in the way we deal with early childhood education, and some of which the governor has already publicly said he's going to go ahead and fund as part of the FY17 budget. There was a subcommittee chaired by Matt Arthur from the technical college system, deputy commissioner of the technical college system, on Move On When Ready. And I told Matt at the outset I wanted Matt and the committee to be bold, and I think they were in terms of their recommendations. There's a lot of good things in there that, if done, could make a difference. If you go back to the Tough Choices, Tough Times report, when we looked at this 10 years ago, we kind of came away with the conclusion that you'd have to be baffled about why we think a model that locks kids up for 13 years in school is satisfactory, and how much the enormous amount of resources that are wasted by not allowing kids that are academically and socially ready to move on to the next level. Now, when that report came out, the tagline was that we were talking about doing away with the junior and senior year in high school. And the first question, literally, that I got at every Rotary Club I talked to was, what will this do to high school football? Which, after I began to shake that off, I said we can't let the dog wag the tail, but whatever. But we've got to find a way to maintain our institutions, to not send 13-year-olds to the bar district in Athens, Georgia. I'm not talking about that. But to move forward and let students progress at their own pace. And Matt and his subcommittee, I think, did a really good job of talking about that. There was a committee that was chaired by Pam Williams, who was from Appling, teacher from Appling County, and Teacher of the Year in Georgia, I think, in 2012 or 2013. I'm not sure which year Pam won the award. And there's probably 20 or 24 different recommendations in that section, which go to the heart of some of the issues that have been in the paper in the last week about the survey that the superintendent led of teachers in the state and what frustrates them. And they did a lot of consultation there, and there's really some good stuff there, good principle things like, not principle like head of the school, but important things that say, you know, don't just keep eating up the time of the teachers. It's not just testing, it's all the bureaucracy that goes on, all the counting tickets at the athletic events and things like that that take the energy, sap the energy out of teaching. I went off the reservation and out of bounds a few times and had teachers that I know, K-12 teachers that I know personally around the state, ask them to put together informal, off-the-grid groups. And I got an earful. So the results in the survey, Mr. Superintendent, did not surprise me at all in terms of the amount of discomfort with the current allocation of the time of teachers. And there's a lot of things in that section, that subcommittee section, that will do that. And then there was a section on school choice, which turned out to be the most, as you would suspect, the most controversial internally in the commission part of the report. The only committee recommendations in the report at the final meeting that were voted down were two report recommendations from the subcommittee on school choice that were voted down on close votes in front of the commission. It gives you a sense of the split on those issues, so that a lot of the recommendations under the school choice subcommittee, which was chaired by Nels Peterson, who at that point was the chief legal officer of the university system of Georgia, but it has now been elevated to a judgeship as of January 1st, I believe. A lot of those are kind of technical tweaks now to trying to correct what everybody sees as just some anomalies in the way the current school choice options, the scholarship program, the State Charter Schools Commission, charter schools in general are treated. So I encourage you to, it's not exact, it's probably a good reading if you're trying to get to sleep at night. The report is, but wade through it and look at the report and the recommendations. I think it's a pretty good report. Susan Andrews is here, who, if there are good parts of this, they're Susan's responsibility, and if you think the report sucks, it's my responsibility. But we really had some very good staff on this, and Susan will be here for the whole rest of the day, and if there are any tough questions, she can answer them. Second rapid fire is, I believe, and I know this is something that people can debate and argue about, is that I believe that the proposed new funding formula is a vast improvement over QBE. It is an extremely technical area. I mean, I remember the first time that when I was working, chairing the Eastlake Foundation, and some of the people from Drew Charter School brought the QBE spreadsheet for Drew Charter School into me, I threw them out of my office because I said I can't cope with that many cells on a piece of paper. QBE is very complicated, pretty rigid. It's based on activities. And I think the sort of general statement I'd make about the proposed student-based funding formula is it's based on students, and the students get weighted, as you will see if you take a look at the report, by various characteristics. For example, for the first time, there's a weight for economically disadvantaged. That erupted in a whole debate too, because the feds have messed up the free and reduced lunch measure to where you can't use that anymore, so you had to come up with a whole new way of measuring a low income. There's a weight for K-3 students because the commission felt that we needed to put an emphasis on literacy for those students. There's a weight that there's one person that pushed it relentlessly and got it into the report, and I support him on it, Lindsey Tippins from Cobb County, Senator Lindsey Tippins, on a weight for 4 or 5 students in math. For ESL students, there's a whole new system, less complicated, for students with disabilities. A lot of other issues that go into this, equalization and sparsity and transportation and how you put principals into the system and so on. Extremely complicated, but I think basically what we've got is a more flexible system that can react to changes in Georgia. There's a lot of discussion about what the report says about teacher pay, and I would ask you to look at pages 51. You don't have them in front of you. They're available electronically. 51 through 53 in the report, which give the details on teacher pay. We are not recommending moving all teacher pay to merit pay. That kind of creeps into some of the language that people are using. What we're saying is that for new teachers, generally, that needs to be one, the words in the report are one component of several components that the local districts would decide to put into a teacher pay system. Generally for new teachers. Generally for existing teachers, if they opt to stay under the old T&E system, the training and experience system, they can stay under it. Complicated issue, and there's a lot of language in there that tries to tie down everything to a gnat's eyebrow, but I think if you read it carefully, you'd come up with maybe a different conclusion than maybe some of the things that have been written about it. Now, that proposal is on the table for discussion. My challenge to people that have, and groups that have said, well, this isn't a good proposal, is you need to come up with a different proposal. You need to tell us what you would do, because my kind of bottom line is the T&E in the long run, the rigid training and experience table is not good enough. There needs to be a system for paying teachers that's better than T&E, that reacts to the effectiveness, if you will, of teachers. And I know there's a lot of differences of that, a lot of concern about how you measure effectiveness. I don't think that's an unsolvable problem. I know it's complicated, but I don't think you can just throw up your hands and walk away from it just because it's complicated. It is true, I will stipulate, that there is a lot else going on with these kids that may underperform in K-12 than teachers and schools. I'm a product of public education. I had some great teachers and I went to great schools, and I always profited because of that kind of an environment that I was in. There are great schools and great teachers in Georgia. That is not the point. The point is the aggregate data doesn't lie. We're talking here about schools, and even though there's issues at home and environment, and in my view there's way too many video games in the world right now and everything else. What we're talking about is schools, and we cannot use the rest of these things as a crutch to say we're not going to do the best we can with the schools. We need to do the best we can with our schools, and then we'll try to do it. We'll let maybe some of us will become engaged on the other issues as well. So I don't want to encroach on the time of the next speaker. So what I'll do is, how much time do I have? About 5 or 10?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay.
Questions?
Okay, and I've got to stand behind the podium.
Dr.
Okay.
Knapp, can you talk a little bit about, of the recommendations from the report, how much of this, how many of these, which issues would be debated by the legislature, but which ones would be, just looked at within DOE?
Well, there is a split. In fact, I wouldn't ask you to do this, but if you went back to the final documents that were discussed at the final meeting, we had a distinction made in there. It just got dropped out of the final report about what could be done administratively and what required legislative action. I think what will happen, and I do not know, the governor hasn't told me exactly how he's going to frame this in the State of the State address, so I guess all I can do with that is tell you to stay tuned. But I would suspect the funding formula will go forward with some of the other parts of this anyway. But I think the real debate at the General Assembly is going to be over the funding formula and over the teacher compensation aspects of the funding formula. And in fact, if you looked at the allocation of time of the funding formula committee, that was where a lot of the time was spent, was on that T&E issue and how you go about funding districts for pay. Our idea was that you fund the districts and then let the districts, again, subject to allowing the existing teachers to stay on T&E if they want to, but over time, let them have the flexibility to build a new compensation model and be able to go forward from there. But that responsibility in the report is clearly laid on the school districts. But a number of these things can be done administratively, both within DECAL and within the State Department of Education. Question? Yeah, Lee?
How is that debate going to break down? Is that debate going to be all about merit pay or other kind of?
I think the teacher comp, the performance part of this will be a major part of the debate. Obviously, the two major school associations have already risen that to level of that's one of the issues. So I think that's going to happen. What I'd like to happen is for the debate to be framed around the data that I showed you at first and how the report responds to that environment, so that we can make sure that we're spending whatever money we have wisely, and then hopefully make the argument for more funding for education down the line. Yes, ma'am.
I cover Fulton County Board of Education. A couple years ago, they came up with some compensation reform just as an idea, and then tabled it while the Education Reform Commission was working. But it sounds like a lot of these things that Dr. Rabosa was looking at as well prior to his departure. How much of this are you going to allow local school districts to decide how they want to compensate? How much of it do you think will be the state demanding that they do it that way? So again, what's the local aspect?
Yeah, the idea is that generally, and there's little twists and turns on this thing because there's some contracts between existing contracts under the flexibility measures that are out there between some school districts and the state board at this point. So you've got to recognize all that. But so I'm speaking in general terms. Is the idea we have is that it would be turned over to the district. The district would be provided technical assistance by the Department of Education and the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. That there, in fact, in some of the documentation here are some models that were put forward because the funding committee, when this was discussed, said, what do these models look like? So the Office of Student Achievement came up with 5 or 6 models that might be what we would put forward. But the proposal then would come from the district back to the Department of Education, presumably. And what our idea is that the Department of Education would have a fairly light hand on that, unless there was something really egregious in it, leave it up to the local districts. I think our sense was that a lot of these decisions are better made at most of these decisions, I would say, are better made at the district level than they are at are in Atlanta. Any other questions? All right, yes. Last question.
Okay, in the legislative debate, if the will of the legislature is to pass the recommendations, the funding formula and all that, minus the teacher compensation aspect of it, how hard is it to back that out of the formula?
You could, I'm not recommending this, understand, but you could back it out and use the current teacher compensation. The rest of the good things in the model would stand on their own. I think that's a major part of it, is to begin to evolve that, to understand how we can measure and reflect effectiveness, and I think we ought to do that, and there are going to be folks that will argue for and against that, but to your point, yeah, you could back it out and do it alone and then do the teacher comp not or later on. I think it would still work. Okay.
Dr. Knapp,
Thank
thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
A lot to think about as we move into the session, what's going to come from the recommendations from the commission. I hope Dr. Knapp will be around for maybe just a few minutes in case any of you need to tackle. You've got to go.
I'm leaving the brains of the commission.
All right, we've got Susan back here to handle the tough questions. And I do want to mention to you that Tamika Hart will be with us until about the lunchtime break, so if you need to catch her for anything. We're going to move into the next segment of the program, and we have our state school superintendent, Richard Woods, with us. Last year, I think the Media Symposium was actually one of his first appearances as the newly elected state school superintendent, so we are so pleased to have him back with us again and talk to us a little bit about what's going on at DOE. And I'm going to change the slide here real quickly. There we go.
Well, good morning. It's amazing how fast a year flies, and to be in office, but it has been a pleasure to represent Georgia as a state school superintendent. Probably one of the questions that people have asked me, as the term has progressed, is that, is it everything you thought it would be, and I think, in reflecting back on that, I think really had to say yes. Because what I did see, taking office, is that we had opportunity in Georgia. We had opportunity to succeed. I do believe that right now that Georgia really is setting itself up that if we progress in a manner that we can truly see a renaissance in education in the state. Something that we will transform education that will probably surpass anything that we could imagine. For the benefit of our kids, for the opportunities of our teachers, and definitely with the really showcase and highlight what is going on in Georgia. I think we really are at the cusp of becoming a national leader across the board. We are already seeing that across the state, and as people look at what is taking place here. So I think that with that, I'm very encouraged about the days ahead and the opportunities that we possess. And I think that when looking at what are some of the accomplishments within a very short period of time, within a year, that we have undertaken. Last year, I think when I stood, one of the first things that I shared with you is that I did believe that we had to have an increase in cooperation, collaboration, and communication throughout the state, throughout the department. And during this past year, I worked very hard to build positive relationships, to restore relationships, and expand relationships across the state. And I think we've been very successful with that. We have a very good working relationship with the governor and the staff there, with our elected officials, with the General Assembly, with our school systems. And, so I think those were important things that had to be restored and expanded, and we worked hard to do that. because it is something we cannot do in isolation. It does take, all of us working together to really become the school system, that we can and offer, the very best for our kids. But also in doing that, we began to reach out to business. We began to reach out to nonprofit and profit groups as well. To look at groups, and again, throughout my time here within a year, we had many people within organizations saying that, Richard, we have never had the state school superintendent come and speak or take an interest in what we are doing. We have had many who have come to say we have never seen, the state, Department of Education or, having the superintendent at the table. And those are things that we will continue to work at so that we can progress and move forward. But also we have looked to stabilize, and I think we've been effective with that, stabilizing math concerns and provide math options throughout the state. That was one of the concerns that I had heard throughout the campaign. And again, as we took steps and again working with the State Board of Education, I think we are doing some things that are more corrective and again having a positive impact on student learning. Also, we placed a high priority on CTE education. We've hosted workforce regional meetings and created an international skills diploma seal. We've also hired a workforce development liaison at the Department of Education. So one of the things we have looked at, we've been proactive, and again, what I would say be more missionary-minded, is that as business comes into our state, let's go out and reach out to them, so that they know, because education, when you look at people, and especially when companies are moving in, one of the first things they look at is the education surrounding the area in which they will live in. And so that was something, and I think a very effective hire we had was Dr. Barbara Wall, coming out of Houston County, again, who has led this initiative. But it is things that where we have, brought, not just the Department of Education. We have looked at local chambers. We have looked at municipalities. We have brought our school systems, our superintendents and CTE programs together, working, with the Department of Labor and other governmental agencies, to say what is best for the area, the regions. We're looking to provide them, really a map of what does their region look like. What are the services they are provided? Are we actually seeing, the education that we need to offer our kids? And so those are things that are ongoing, and I'm very excited about the prospect there. And again, like I said, we're seeing a reemergence of the CTA program. Saying away, we moved away from really saying that every child is going to attend a four-year university, which I think on paper is nice. But, the practical and reality of life is that we need all individuals. And again, whether they pursue something in our technical colleges or four-year universities or military apprenticeships, this offers, something for all kids. And what we find out is within our pathways, we have all children attending, whether they be four-year university or technical school courseways and pathways, across the spectrum. They are getting experience. And I think this is something, again, what I'm very proud of, is that it's preparing them for life. And that's really what we should be looking at, providing and looking at the needs of the kids, but again, supporting, the growth of our state and making sure that we are, a strong state as we move forward. So I think we will see some wonderful things here as we begin to look at this. And again, looking at hiring the department's first fine arts individual in probably decades. I think, one of the things that was shared with me, I think it's been close to 20 years that we actually had a fine arts individual on staff. And what we have found out, again, as I've met with people, is that they have said, we like art. We think art, we think PE, we think, dance, drama, visual arts. Those are important things. And that's one of the things I've been very, passionate about, is saying we need to address the entire child. Because what these things do is that they allow our children to really take those critical thinking skills and apply them in other areas. One of the things I look at that was kind of shared with me, I think it was either 40% of either tech graduates or 40% of the people that enter Georgia Tech, they have a music background. Well, that says a little bit about, the students that are attending there. And so I think those are things that we look at in building. And then again, allowing something we work with Commissioner Fitzgerald with Move On When Ready. Something as simple as allowing our kids to go out and say, you can, have physical activity at least 30 minutes a day. And those things are important, for our kids to have as they move forward. But also, again, not neglecting, the academic portion. We look at, increasing STEM certification within there. We're beginning to see a large movement. A lot of schools are interested in this. I think we're up to, I believe, over 30 schools that are certified. And so when I started, I think there were about 12 schools that were STEM certified at the beginning. So we are seeing that, and there are numerous schools that are in that application process. So science, technology, engineering, math, those are things that we know that are important. Business is interested in that. Communities are interested in that. And we are seeing some wonderful, activities go on throughout the state that mirror this. But also, again, putting that, going back and tying in the fine arts aspect, one of the things we're looking at, we're trying to make sure that now we have STEM, but for those schools that have reached that platitude, let's move on to STEAM, adding that fine arts component to that. And so that we just don't stop with our laurels and say we have accomplished this, but how do we, progress and allow our high-performing schools to move forward. But again, this is something that many schools, whether they are a Title I school or some of our high-performing schools, they are adopting this and taking this on with a lot of excitement. And also with this, and again, we'll kind of touch a little bit, I think it's been talked a little bit this week with our survey that we put out. We are trying to reduce student testing. I think we've allowed school systems the ability to limit the number of student learning objectives. Some of you, the acronym of SLOWs, which is attached to this. 2 for a race to the top district, and 1 for the non-race to the top district. So we are seeing some things in which we are trying to put testing back into its proper place. Not being so redundant and not being so overbearing. We still have a ways to go, but at least we are trying to do some things and address that concern. This year also we provided all students attending Georgia pre-K and kindergarten with a book. One of the passions that I share with the governor and his wife is literacy. And that is something that I am totally committed to. That again, my vision is to make sure that all kids are reading at grade level by the time they finish 3rd grade. If we are going to make significant improvement in education, we have to have our children reading. And they have to be proficient in reading. And that will be something I've shared with my staff that as we look at this, that we will begin to move forward with that to make sure that becomes a reality. Because I cannot understate the value of K-5 education. I was a high school social studies teacher. I saw individuals as they came, and again, one of the things we look at that I had concern with the kids is that was their ability to read. I could teach them content. But again, reading opens up doors that these kids cannot even imagine. And again, a strong fundamental, sound understanding of math and the concepts there by the time they leave 5th grade is also necessary. In conjunction with that, we provided all 4th graders with a pocket constitution. Something that this was provided, outside of taxpayer money. Again, teaching our young people about citizenship, the value of what it means to be an American. We cannot overstate that or understate that as well. Because we need to have individuals who are engaged, who know the political process, who know their rights. And so that's something we will continue to work on to make sure that our kids are very engaged in that. We have really a very successful departmental strategic plan. And again, that I believe is online. I'm not sure. I don't think we have copies with it today. But it's something that as I've shared with the state board, and we presented this information to them at the board retreat. One of the things I said to them, I said, listen, you hold myself and you hold the department accountable. And within that strategic plan, we have made and set up metrics in which we can measure the progress. Because if something is not working, we need to address that. If it's the old adage, if it's a dead horse, we need to get rid of it. And so those are things that we'll look at. We will be accountable. And I think we talk about accountability, and again, some of the things we looked at, I'm not afraid of accountability, just as all teachers and educators are not accountable. We just want it to be fair, and I think that we have set up a process working with individuals, outside the framework of the department so that we can achieve that. And also, we think we have, one of the things we have looked at is that we have, a booklet, that we have some of the booklets here, and it talks about educating Georgia's future. And it has a lot more information than I have time to talk about today, but it shows about where we're at, where we're going, and so it almost gives you a state of education in Georgia and some of the priorities that we have. So I do know we have some copies. I think they may be just outside, but you can see, I think, Communication Director Matt Cardoza, who will be here all day and provide that. What are we doing in progress? Some things that we are working on. We are working with course articulation with the university system and the technical school system. One of the things we look at with Move On When Ready and Dual Enrollment, those are things in which I'm very supportive of. But we want to make sure that as kids move from course to course, that we don't leave them stranded. That we make sure that as they perhaps move from K-12 to higher ed, that the course articulation means that they can seamlessly move within the system itself. And so there will be some things that we're looking at. We're talking with our counselors to make sure, what are some things that we can do to provide information with our parents to say, hey, listen, this is stuff that as you look with what your child is taking, that if this is the course and the direction they want to go, these are the courses they need. And so this is something we're ongoing, and I think that in perhaps a year or two, we'll see some big strides in that. And again, that will be one of the biggest things that we could do is help provide solid and clear direction for our parents and our young people. Also we're developing a statewide literacy plan. Again, I've already mentioned, the importance of literacy, and again, that we'll enroll that. We are in the process of conducting a statewide testing audit. So I thank the Georgia Partnership, who is leading that initiative. And we began to receive information back, and I think close to, is it 170 systems, Matt, I think, with that. So we are showing that our school systems are interested in this. So we have a lot of input, and again, we're beginning to get that process. And again, as we receive more information, definitive information, we will pass that along. But I do thank the Georgia Partnership for working with us on that. We have created a Superintendent's Business and Industry Advisory Council. And that is in conjunction of having a student advisory council, a parent advisory council, a teacher advisory council, and a superintendent advisory council. We are trying to make sure that we have input. And again, that's very reflective of what we see within our strategic plan. To make sure that those things that our partners that we are looking at, we are not doing things in isolation. Because we have to have buy-in across the state. And again, because if we sit there and if it's something that's dependent upon Richard Woods, we basically have created a fad. We need to look at something long term, something that will be here and build upon what is best for our students and our teachers. So we're continue with that. Also this year we will unveil our new science and social studies standards, and I believe this will be one that perhaps in my mind will be the best rollout of our standards. We will make sure that we are aligned with testing. We will make sure that we have the teacher support mechanism so that when they come and they look at this, that that everyone else who has had the process or been through this process, they'll say, I wish I had this when I was going through that. And so this is something we are setting up, and it will be something I think that we will be very, very pleased with because it will be, and it's being developed by Georgia teachers, the people that know our students best, and other individuals are there. It will be Georgia owned and Georgia grown, because I do believe our best talent is out there in the field, and I have seen that as I've visited over 70 counties, not saying schools or school systems, but over 70 counties within the time that I've been in office in a relatively short time. But also we'll be reviewing the textbook and resource adoption process, something that has caught some attention within the past year or so. With it, and I think providing see that we are not working in isolation. We are working with the Department of Agriculture, and again with Commissioner Black on a 2020 project. And again, those would be some things that we have looked at. I believe he and our department have had a small release with that, but that's something exciting. That where we are looking at people at the local level, working with our schools, working with different departments to provide the very best we can for our kids in our schools. And I think that also improving the GNETS program and service, one of the things that has caught some attention, but we have been proactive in that, hiring an individual that will handle the GNETS program, working with behavioral health as well in conjunction with that. So we're going to see to make sure, because we do not want to leave any child behind, we do not want to leave anyone outside. And so those are things that we look at, because we're in charge. And again, as I've shared with people, my wife and I, we don't have any children, but I said that perhaps assuming this office, I adopted 1.7 million. And that's where we want to make sure that for each and every child that I treat them as my own, and I want them to succeed. And that is what we share with the department as well. And I think that lastly, as I kind of conclude and give you time for some questions, recently this week we've attracted a little bit of attention with the teacher survey with teacher recruitment and retention. And again, the report was something that this was not really done really short-sighted. Because what you look at, if you look at with the development of our strategic plan, we mentioned that concern way back when. And so, as we were doing this has been months in the work. We look at the booklet, you will see that it has been mentioned there. But one of the things that I found out that what I saw with this concern was on the campaign trail. That's where, it really began to really hit home. When I met with teachers and continue to meet with teachers, they said, Richard said, I just can't do it anymore. I've been in education maybe 10, 15 years, but, I just can't do it. I heard veteran teachers for the very first time said, I just can't encourage people to get an education. The very first school visit that I had in Athens, Clark, You know, I had a teacher said, I have a daughter who wants to go in, you know, in the education, but I can't encourage her to go in. So, and I think that even recently I had a parent said, you know, had a daughter who wanted to go in education, and the parent said, I'm not going to pay for it. That's impactful. But it is something that really, you know, should not be, because as a teacher, you know, I remember the individuals that had the impact that encouraged me. And again, as a teacher myself, you know, I sat there and encouraged young people to go in to this profession because it is worth it. It is worth it. As I look at this and what the report said, you know, 44% of teachers leave by year 5. You know, that's unsustainable. We have 16% decrease, you know, in teacher, you know, or 16% decrease in teacher candidates entering college. You know, if we continue to see this, you know, we already have shortages in critical areas. And so we have to sit there and look at what we are doing. You know, 53,000 educators responded across the state, almost half the workforce in this survey. And I think probably the other 50, you know, said, you know, probably didn't respond because they're, you know, somewhat saying, well, I've filled out surveys and, you know, nothing's ever done. But, you know, this is something where, you know, I've asked for the feedback, and I appreciate what the teachers and educators across the state did and provided that. And in conjunction with that, we had over 3,500 pages of commentary. Not 3,500 statements, but 3,500 pages of commentary. And I can't tell you the number of emails that I've received since the report has went out. And so this continues to be, and it is a concern. And so I think that, you know, we're looking at 66% of the Georgia teachers, you know, stated they were unlikely to encourage their students to go into the profession. Only 2.7 said they were very likely to do that. You know, looking at the concerns of what is driving our teachers out, you know, the number and emphasis on mandated tests. And again, I would agree with this. I mean, everything from what I've seen since No Child Left Behind, and I go back to starting with that area, is that what we have seen is that it has now become about the test. You know, I go into schools and I see banners that say, you know, it tells you about the test. And one of the things that, you know, disturb me is that, you know, we are not about the test. We're about the children of Georgia. And that's something we've got to change at what we're looking at. If we are going to make a difference in education, it is not going to be about some test. It's going to be about making a difference with children, building those relationships. Again, yesterday or a couple days ago, I met with a teacher. He said, Richard, the most important thing I do is build a relationship with my kids. That's where I had the impact. And so looking at that, you know, we have the teacher evaluation method, you know, the accountability system. And again, as I've shared, teachers are not afraid of accountability. We want to be held accountable. And I understand that we must be held accountable, but it must be a system that is fair and allows each system, again, because not one size fits all, just as we look at this. And so I think, you know, in the days ahead, we'll continue to process and look what we have. But again, within the report, again, I won't belabor this, but it is some things that we have. This is just the beginning. It does not mean this is where we stop. Again, looking at some things that I've shared of what we can do and what reauthorization has opened. You know, I think there are some things working across the board as we, you know, continue to look at testing. We'll see what happens here. The education reform, again, as that, you know, begins to roll out. You know, we're going to make some positive moves, and I think we have the, you know, the ability to do that. Working with the board and the General Assembly, you know, these are things, and the governor and all individuals across the state. I mean, this is something that, you know, that my plans are to bring in, you know, all stakeholders, talk with them. Again, I've already shared the process. Again, even during the Christmas break, my time was spent talking with individuals, you know, learning from them and listening to them, and again, trying to, you know, create something and share, this is what we're seeing and what can we do to fix it. I think we are the individuals that are best suited to fix the problem. And so that's the charge that I give the education across the state. You know, we cannot be individuals who just say no. But anytime that we have something, again, I would agree with Dr. Knapp, you know, my thing is that let's bring solutions to the table. And that is what the DOE, and I think that we are looking at doing and bringing this to the cross, is Georgia will solve these issues. But it will be a process in which we bring all stakeholders together. But in the short term, what we are looking at doing is you know, some things we can control. We are piloting a tier observation system within, you know, for teacher evaluation. It is my plans to make that go statewide next year. Again, that has been received very favorably across the state. Looking at how can we, you know, perhaps collapse some tests to make sure that we're not so redundant, with them. I think, looking at, students or milestone, or let's excuse me, pushing for the elimination of milestone testing requirements for students who participate and move on when ready, who earn an A or a B. And it's not saying that school systems that they will not receive credit for that, but if you receive an A in your college course, then you get that distinguished credit. So I think it is a seamless alignment, so we're not losing or really, interrupting, the process which we have in the state. But again, to look at, in the long run, perhaps, the IB exams and, the ACT, again, where can we further reduce the number of milestones that students have to take? We don't have to be so redundant in what we do. Even within, I think the AP, what is shared with me is that typically a student may take 3 tests. Well, I mean, do you necessarily have to have a final exam and an AP exam and and a milestones on top of that? Why don't you just collapse that and better use the time? Again, that's one of the things that my student advisory has mentioned. Okay, this is not information that I share with you. It's not something that basically comes from me. But those are things that we have looked at and trying to move forward with that. We've tried to listen, but I'll stop and take some some questions at this time. I know I stand between you and lunch, so I'll let you decide how hungry you are. Okay, we'll go here and then kind of work our way. Yes, ma'am.
My question is on the issue of merit pay.
Yes.
And in the Opportunity School District, do you feel like this, with your first year behind you, you're going to take more involved in the political side of it? Because even House Speaker Ralston has come out and challenged the governor on performance pay, saying we just don't have reliable metric. Dr. Knapp said he thinks we should move on it because we need to do something. Where do you stand on these issues? Will we hear more from you this session?
Well, I think so. I think right now, and out of respect to the governor, I've not seen the final project or what this looks like. So I don't want to overstep my bounds and just assume things that are out there. So I look forward to seeing that and moving forward. I think today, again, as even Dr. Knapp mentioned, our school systems, they do have flexibility as far as looking at the compensation. They already have that built in. In fact, I think all but 2 systems, because they have chosen either to go to the strategic waiver method or the charter school method. So there is something that's there. We do have a couple systems. I know that I think Marietta and I think Fulton have already looked at experimenting with a compensation model. I have not spoken with their leadership, so I think looking to see with that. But I think in conjunction with that, the important issue is the funding mechanism itself. I think we need to look at that to make sure that if we can have a funding formula. Again, I go back and I can date myself back to QBE, but if we can have a funding formula that we actually fund and sustain, then I think, let's work on getting that. I mean, that really sets the table for everything to come. And what I've seen so far, I think, looks very promising. And if the governor can accomplish that, then he's done more than, I've seen accomplished in education probably since Zell Miller did with the conception of QBE. But, there again, QBE was never funded. So let's hopefully get a system there we can do that. Okay, I think we had a question in the back. Yes, sir.
Mr. Wood, Mr. Knapp mentioned that there were administrative fixes to some of the educational problems, and there were legislative fixes to some of the problems.
Yes, sir.
Have you looked for potential administrative fixes to some of the over-testing issues, and what would those be?
Well, I think what we've done so far is even this year, we've looked at, as far as reducing the number of SLOs or the student learning objectives, that we did give our schools an option to bring that down. For the race to the top, they had to have 2. This year, we've looked at, and with the non-race to the top, they could bring that down to 1. So, that they had the ability to really cut that back. Instead of each and every class having a student learning objective, you could cut that down significantly. So for teachers that had multiple classes, again, I take for myself, when I was an educator, that when I first started out, I think I taught 6 different classes, okay? So that would have meant that from moving from 6, and now I could have had just 1. So we have looked at that. We are continuing to look at what we can do, from my standpoint, because I do have to work with a lot of people. That means I have to work with the board. I've asked, right now, the policy division to look at some things within, within Title 20 to see legally what will require General Assembly action, what will require state board action, and what can I do inherently within policy itself. So I think as the process begins, you'll see more, but at least with that, we were able to address the testing issue, and that was something we could do. And I think even there, I think just letting people know, I think from some of the things we did with math, I mean, saying student or school systems, if you want to use, I guess, algorithms that, for some reason, some people just assumed that they had to use a certain set of algorithms. So I think clarifying what we're already doing and communicating is something we've been effective with. Yes, sir.
With a short session, what do you think or hope legislature will tackle in order to say your top 5?
Well, I think that, of course, the funding formula, it goes, first and foremost, because, I mean, school systems, we have to know what we're dealing with. I mean, when we're looking at planning and long-term planning, then, the budget definitely falls, into that. We've looked, I think, at the crisis there. I think you're looking at testing. I think that's something we have to, continue to look at, because we have to maintain our workforce. And so I think some of the issues that were brought up, and again, I did not go, totally into that. Those are some things we'll look at. For myself, K-5 education, and especially in literacy, we have to have the foundation. And all the other things that we looked at progressively, what we're working on, those will be some things. But, having that funding, but those are probably the top 3 if I had to lay those out. Yes, sir.
Do you agree that the proposed funding formula and the committee report is a vast improvement over QVE?
Well, I would say this: if it's fully funded, it's always in the details there. I mean, it's as far as looking at that, it does take into reality. I mean, we live in the world of a balanced budget. I mean, we cannot create, and we don't have a printing press at the DOE. Yeah, I think, Dr. Knapp mentioned we would love to see more money. I think one of the things we look at that I would say with the funding formula, that as revenue does increase, I would hope, we would see the example. I know Governor Deal within the past few years has continued to add money into education as our funding has gone up. And I hope that would continue, that it would be across the board, that we would see that. I know that there are other agencies that want and need other resources. But as we do see resources across the state go up, I hope that would be the case. So, that's kind of where we'll look at that. Yes.
Quick question. Would you recommend following the federal lead of just having national assessment on reading and math and skipping social studies and science, because you can really link those two together, math and science and reading and social studies?
Well, definitely I think in K-5 education that has to be a priority. I mean, really, because of what we know that reading, keeping reading and math, that's critical with that. And I think for as far as flexibility and talking with other individuals, I don't want to diminish the role of science and social studies. I think it's very important. Now, at some point, do we need those tests? I mean, we'll have to look at, because really I think my concern is that even with the tests we use, how are we using those tests to make sure that they're effective?
Would you give local schools districts who's under a charter such as Fulton that flexibility and perhaps skipping the milestones and just doing a final exam?
Well, I think that could be something to be talked about, but like I said, there again, I'd have to look at the federal law, because I don't want to overstate something that, right now we know a general framework, but once the bureaucrats, create, the entire document, it may look a little bit different than what we're looking at, and it may be say that you have to have this. So, I think you're trying to look at, being flexible and responsible. We have had a few school systems who have approached me on that issue, saying we have some tests that perhaps could take the place of some things. So I think, we'll work with our partners to see what comes out. Okay, let me go back here and I'll come back. All right? Yes, sir.
Is the Milestones program going to need some major changes before it can serve as a gateway test? You've said a lot about making possible exceptions to Milestones. The first year results, I think, have resulted in a lot of students not being promoted to the next grade as a gateway.
Well, I think, this year, it was a hold harmless year. So, nothing really had an effect. We had to, benchmark the Milestones test. And I think we'll be responsible. We'll look at it, and again, I'm not willing to sacrifice quality over quantity. And if we need to make changes, we'll make changes. I think one of the recommendations within the reform, if I'm not mistaken, was actually using the milestones and giving them multiple, assessments during the course of the year. And again, not wanting to assume past that, but I'm very much a formative type individual. I think having diagnostic tests throughout the course of the year provides teachers said, this is where my child is right now, this is where I need to go. So, I think anything's on the table as far as I'm concerned, and to be responsible with that. But there again, whatever changes or whatever, thing we look at, it will not go without, consultation with our local school systems and, the legislature, because it is something we have to all be on board.
Regarding the Reform Commission's report, and you mentioned they hadn't seen the bill and that you want the funding to be fully funded.
Yes.
But as Dr. Knapp said, there's a lot in that report. Have you spoken to the governor or do you have an opinion as to what you'd like to see from those commission recommendations, which would be priorities to be in the bill and which you just weren't in the bill?
Well, we've been in contact with the governor's office, so those are things we don't take lightly, and we're very open about our thoughts in the process. But until the full recommendation and I have not seen what the governor's full proposal will be, and I don't wish to impose upon him in that, and I look forward to continue working together with him. And I feel confident we will have something that will be very, I think that our teachers and educators and school systems in the state of Georgia will be very proud of.
Maybe one more question.
Okay, back here, yes.
I had the occasion yesterday to be in a room at a local school district where the following came up. Move-in minority students don't get to take a required end of course test until the testing window is set up by the school department, State Department comes around, and sometimes that is a disadvantage to the student and their grade. Is that something that you're looking into to align, to provide multiple opportunities for those kids that are moving either faster than a year or slower than a year or they're into the next semester?
Yes, ma'am.
The other thing that came up again with Move On When Ready is if a student, these are high school students, take a course at a higher education institution to substitute for a course in high school which has an end of course test, but the delivery mechanism doesn't have anything to do with the questions on the test. Yeah, again, which puts the students at a disadvantage. Is that something that you're looking into that maybe you can give some guidance to counselors and high schools about?
Well, again, going back to our articulation agreements with higher ed, those are something that we definitely are concerns. And I think that's, looking at our accountability system. I think Move On When Ready to dual enrollment, those are excellent programs. They offer our kids, and again, to be honest, again, what was shared with the agency head meeting, they were expecting, X amount of growth in these areas, but it has grown exponentially. And so we have seen a lot of favorability in that, and we want to make sure that we do not stand in the way. We don't want to make sure that we do not have, quote, regulations or compliance measures that stand in the way of an education of a child. We do have requirements. I mean, that's looking at, one of the things we have to look at is, what does a diploma or a graduation requirement look like for a child? And I think there are some flexibilities, whether it's at that end, for those students who are, attending higher ed, but also within, our school systems. Maybe our virtual school could meet some of these needs. So, we're seeing some things in which, it's uncharted territory. And I think when anytime you have birthing pains, we understand there's going to be some things there. But, I've not moved away from my support of those two areas. But you're right. I mean, I think that's where, going back, talking with counselors, and we've had some meetings with the counselor. I think the General Assembly had a commission on counseling. So we're trying to do some things that we align, because even what we look at is that even with higher ed, that sometimes that to go into, say, Valdosta State requires X class, but then you go to Georgia Tech, that may require a different set of classes. So, we're trying to have that balance, and it'll be an ongoing discussion, but we definitely don't want our testing and accountability system really just because of bureaucracy to stand in that. So we'll be working with our kids, and hopefully, it may not be so much we can do this year, but as we progress, we'll get better at it. And like I said, I really expect great things to come out of those initiatives. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Excuse me.
Many thanks to Superintendent Woods for joining us today and answering all your questions. It sounds particularly like the Department of Education is really reaching out to be responsive to its many stakeholders, from parents to students to teachers across the board, business as well.